The Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US, a podcast in which we explore the mind-bending world of global supply chains, covering topics such as automation, innovation, unique identity, and more. I'm your co-host, Reed.
And I'm Liz.
And welcome to the show.
I just had a great conversation with Chris Walton from Omni Talk. He has a media company that works with retail in all different verticals on kind of what's next. We had an amazing conversation about all the different things that have been happening, what he thinks is going to stick and what may not stick in the retail world. We talked about curbside pickup, about how checkouts are changing, how stores are getting in front of inventory and price changes and electronic shelf labels. It was a fascinating conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. There's so much going on in your world that we're so excited to hear. But first, just let's level set. Tell us a little bit about Omni Talk and your role there.
Oh, cool. Very nice. Great question to start. So Omni Talk was founded in 2017. My business partner and I, we met each other at Target. I've got a long history as a retail operator, spent 20 years in retail working for The Gap and then almost 15 years at Target itself. And we founded Omni Talk because at the time, when we were working at Target, our last job was heading up a project called the Store of the Future, which was trying to answer the question 5 to 10 years out, why are people still coming to stores to shop? And as we were doing that work, we noticed that the media was kind of liberal in their interpretations or their thoughts and feelings around what technologies were impacting retail and should be impacting retail. And honestly, we took a lot of issues with some of the things that the media was saying at the time. And so we thought there was a real white space for honest, candid, frank commentary on technology and its impact in retail. And it turns out that hypothesis or that thesis was true. Here we are 6 years later. We've grown Omni Talk into a full-fledged media platform. It started out, believe it or not, with me writing an article in a coffee shop. And the next thing I knew, people were reading it. I started writing articles every week. Then we got into podcast and video, which is now our signature form of content. And we think it's our job to just put out there from an honest perspective as real retailers, what matters and what doesn't in terms of how retail is going to play out. We try to do it as unbiasedly as possible. There's a lot of bias in the media. Like a lot of times the journalists are just regurgitating headlines that they get from the retail companies. A lot of times they were writing for Good Housekeeping the week before, and now they're on the retail beat. So you question their expertise. And even the consultants that are out on social media oftentimes bring a lot of bias to the equation. So we try to level the playing field, just give good, honest education out there. And our audience is really geared towards the retail executive that's having to make decisions about technology. Like, what are the considerations they should make? What should they have top of mind as they're making those decisions? And that's why we do what we do day in and day out. My role is simple. I'm the co-CEO with my partner, Ann Mazinga. We run it day to day. And my job is really on the content side, probably primarily. Ann runs more of the operations, but my job is to really be the eyes and ears of what content we want to put out and what technology companies we want to work with as we help people sort through all those questions that are in their head.
And there's so much noise.
Yes.
So it's helping everybody filter out and make decisions in a real way, not with what they hear out there, which is really cool. And I'm sure everybody appreciates the unbiased part because there is so much, you don't know what to believe. There's so many terms and technologies and all the things. Like, how do you know what to do?
Yeah, and we're a media company too. So like we take it very seriously. So like there's a lot of competitors in our space that will take advertising dollars from any Tom, Dick, and Harry technology company. We won't. We'll only work with the companies that we believe in and we think are an important part of the conversation going forward.
So with all of that, the past few years, with all the pandemic, and I'm actually kind of sick, and I'm sure you are, of talking about the pandemic and post-pandemic, but a lot of things came to light and we all need to be able, and businesses need to be able to adapt. But how has the physical store changed? And it sounds like you were even thinking about this pre-pandemic. And so I'm sure things shifted post-pandemic. What's going on with the physical store?
Yeah, for sure we were. We've been thinking about it. I mean, that's kind of the core of what we do. We always are looking at the intersection of really three elements: the physical, the digital, and the human side of how retail is done, which when you say it that way, the store is always a very important part of that equation. And that's what we focus on. We don't focus on true digital only commerce. That's not our wheelhouse. It's really the true omnichannel nature of how retail gets done. And so to answer your question, to me, I'm a little sick of it, but I also love talking about it because it's kind of what we do every day. But for me, I look at it, there's really three ways that I think stores were starting to change already, but now have sped up that process of change. And three things driving that really. And so number one, the thing that you're seeing first and foremost, you started really seeing it at the beginning of this year, is that the back rooms of retail stores are getting larger, particularly the new stores that retailers are building. I would point to examples of Sam's Club, Target as being the primary ones, even Walmart to a certain degree. And they're also putting automation into those back rooms. And the reason they're doing that is that the stores are closer to the consumer from a last mile perspective. And so they want to process as many shipments as they can out of the stores themselves to save on the overall delivery cost. So that's why you're seeing that movement. So when you're building a new store, how big that back room is and how you're setting it up for shipping is becoming an integral question that retailers are trying to answer as they develop new stores. The second thing I think you're seeing, and the pandemic for sure made this happen, is the parking lots are changing. The parking lots are looking really different than ever before. I mean, I just went to my local Chick-fil-A and there's like 100 curbside pickup spots. Now that's an exaggeration, it's hyperbole, but it's true. And that's all because of the pandemic. And so you're seeing in new store developments there for both QSR and retail that curbside pickup is now a legitimate phenomenon that people are designing their stores to. And the data backs it up. Like the number of retailers that offered curbside pickup before the pandemic was below 10%. I think it was like in the range of 3 to 6%. And then by the summer of 2021, that number was almost 60%. So it shows you how we as consumers have gravitated towards that. And it's not really slowing down at all. So retailers are going to continue to design to that. So what does that mean? Well, it means you're going to architect your parking lots differently. It means you're going to have different capabilities. Like you're seeing things like Walmart testing vending machines that come to your cars via autonomous robots, that are selling beef jerky like sample stations in the store to incent that in-store purchase. So that's just unfettered territory in terms of how things are going to evolve, but it's going to happen. And then the last point I'd say, this is probably somewhat a reflection of the pandemic in terms of the contactless thing that we always talked about, but it's also just a natural evolution of retail, which is how we check out in a store is continuing to change because there's a premium on convenience. If we're going to that store, curbside is another example of that. I want that experience when I want it quick, I want it fast, efficiently. But when I go into the store, what does that experience look like? And so you're seeing a lot of innovation on that front, whether it's scan and go technology implementations, Amazon just walk out technology implementations, or their clones of that as well, like some of the companies like Trigo and iFi that are doing similar things. That's going to continue to happen, all as the stores, in essence, try to become smarter and read and react to their customers on this Internet of Things mentality, where they can understand who you are and get you in and out of that experience as quickly as you want to get out of it at the end of the day.
So do you think that, because our local Target now has, and I think it's 40 spots in the middle of the dang parking lot. And I'm like, come on, because I like to go into the store, right?
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, maybe during the holidays, but obviously there's data to back up that they need X number of parking spots. And it really is eye-opening because it's in the middle of where I would want to park close to the store, right? Is there also that, not pushback, but concern from consumers with all of those 3 points that you just made, not necessarily the back room because they don't know about that, but the checkout and the people who don't want to pick up then? I mean, are people complaining?
Not that we've seen. I mean, for the most part, to your point, like the backroom thing is seamless to consumers, so no one cares about that, right? But on the curbside front and the checkout front, that's a good question because some of those elements start to enter into the mindset of the consumer. Let's take the curbside one first. Curbside, I don't think so, because the pandemic made that part of our understanding of how we want to shop as consumers. People started loving it. And it's a way to interact digitally with the consumer that's similar to a true e-commerce transaction, but it changes the elements somewhat. The retailers love it because they don't have to ship the product, right? So it's cheaper. So that's why your example of Target, they're going all in on that because it's a better economics around it for them. And the consumer, for example, it also frees them up to do things on their own schedule. So now you can simulate an e-commerce order, but you can do it on your own schedule. You can do it on your way home from work. You can do it when you're picking up the kids on the way home from the gym. And you're seeing other elements get added into it over time. So I think that also tells you that it's here to stay and the consumer is going to want it. So for example, let's use Target again. Target's added Starbucks to your curbside pickup order. So now you can stop by there, pick up your, did you know that, right? We have a video of it online. You should check it out, actually. Everyone listening, and Liz, you should check it out too, based on the look on your face. I pulled up to a Target, had a curbside pickup order, and I ordered my Starbucks, shot a video of how they brought it out. Super simple, super easy. And the next wave of that is actually returns. Returns are a big hassle. You've got to go to your UPS store. They make it as simple as you can, especially if you're Amazon. You just go, you show the barcode, done. Retailers are going to start to do that same thing through curbside. So when you put it in that dimension from a consumer standpoint, there's no reason not to love it. The checkout freeze side, though, is very different because that is going to require a new customer acclimation to how they shop. Somewhat brought about by contactless, but that contactless fear has kind of gone away. The question now is, okay, what wins? You've got everything from like just walk out to scan and go. You've got smart carts where you have a cart that knows what you're putting in your basket and you can just walk out of the store that way. Schnucks just a couple of weeks ago announced that they're planning to do that. No one knows how that's going to play out or which, or if any of those options the consumer is going to gravitate towards, because at the end of the day, the bar is pretty high on self-checkout. If you look at how a self-checkout machine has evolved from what it used to be, like the skipped item in the bagging area that used to frustrate the hell out of us, that doesn't happen anymore as often. And so that's the bar they have to meet. They have to make that experience better than that. And that's a question, right? And it'll take time. It's kind of analogous to when, if you think back to the airports, how we went from all standing in line to check our bags to going and checking into a kiosk. And there was a period of time where they had both options, and they still do to some degree, but they had both options, but they wanted to push you to that. And retail will do the same thing. It's going to take a number of years, but what that right answer is still an open question. And that's what I like focusing on is, what are the puts and takes on each of those options as a retailer, as a consumer, which one will...
One question. If you talk about the curbside pickup, when I'm in a checkout, and maybe I'm the anomaly, I don't think, and like the places where you pick up the magazines or the candy or the gum, right, at the last minute purchases, are they losing out on that? And is that a concern?
100%. Yeah, that's the biggest concern. And that's a big concern for both the retailers and the brands that supply those areas. And so that's actually why I pointed to there's going to be a lot of innovation in the space, particularly in the parking lot space or in the online space. Like, do you want a Starbucks now with your curbside order? Do you want a pack of gum? Do you want a Coke? Like, how those user interfaces evolve to still capture that impulse purchase are going to be top of mind for the reason you said, because yes, that is a big concern for the retail community and the brands that service them right now. And also why I brought up the whole idea of like robots in the parking lot, driving around, kind of like concessions at a ball game is the best analogy I can give you. Like, you're waiting in your car. Oh, I don't know when this order is going to come out. Maybe it's 2 minutes, maybe it's 10 minutes, but you know what? I'd really like a stick of gum or a bottle of water, but we don't know the answer to those questions yet. But yeah, that innovation is going to happen in some degree.
When you said about the robots, the vending machines coming to your car, that's what I thought about, is because you're standing there in line and you pick up whatever it is that you didn't need and it wasn't on your list, and they're not having that. So to be able to get something to drink or a snack, or even like the idea of the Starbucks, it's making that inside and out of store experience even that much more seamless and cool. It has a cool factor to it too.
Yeah. And it doesn't even have to be like souped up robots. It could just be like standard vending machines in those curbside spots that you're pulling up to, in those 40 slots. Maybe they also have that element that you can unlock with your phone to some degree, or who knows. But I mean, it's just fertile ground for experimentation to try to figure out the answer to the question that you're asking.
Yeah, it's really cool. So what is cutting edge? What is the retail technology innovations that are being used and tested by stores now? And is it changing the way retailers do business? It's not cut and dry anymore.
No, it's not. Ultimately, what every retailer is trying to do, and I mentioned this before, they're trying to create a smart store. A store that understands everything you're doing as a consumer when you're inside it, much the same way that you understand what we're doing as consumers when we browse a website. We know everything we click on, everything we add to cart. In a store, we really only know that activity once the purchase is completed. We don't know anything a consumer's doing inside that store while they're walking around. And so that's what a smart store is. It's the design of the store, the physical store, to give you that understanding. So the best example I can point to across the verticals is one I've already mentioned, and that's Schnucks. Schnucks out of St. Louis. And I think groceries are especially important coming out of the pandemic to keep that in mind too, because they're the ones that are the most charged with figuring out the answer, figuring out the economics of this business, because shipping groceries is just really difficult for them. But Schnucks should be applauded for how they're going about the design of their smart store. So for example, the things I would point to that tell me they're going in the right direction. In about 2020, they started testing robots in their store. They have robots that roam the aisle of all 100 plus of their stores, right? Have you seen it?
I have.
And the robots just go around a few times a day, and their purpose is really two things. It's to monitor the inventory on shelves and to ensure that the pricing is accurate on shelves. Okay. And then from there, they've also worked with pricing analytics companies to understand their pricing dynamics as they occur through the course of a day. They've also added electronic shelf labels into that equation so that the prices can be monitored and adjusted in real time to any discrepancies that the robots find on shelf or any opportunities that the algorithms find to better drive sales through promotions or just price cuts. Really smart way to approach it. They have a complete understanding of what's happening on the shelf day in and day out. That helps them understand and deliver their assortments and their pricing to consumers in the way their consumers want it. And then, like I mentioned before, they're also looking now at, okay, let's now connect that experience for the consumer by way of a smart cart, where the consumer can take a cart. It has a screen on it that they can serve up promotions. So then the retail media network idea flows into this equation as well. It understands where they are in the browse path of the store, most likely, or will over time. It understands where they're stopping, what they're buying, what they're putting in the cart, what they're putting in the cart, taking out of the cart. Very similar to e-commerce principles here. And so that's why they're doing the experimentation. Whether they have all the right answers is still to be determined, but that's the right way to go about it. There are plenty of other examples too. Zara in their flagship store in Madrid, which we've also shot a video. If anyone's interested in seeing how that works online, is another great example. Different approach they're doing there. They're doing it more through scan and go and RFID, but the overall idea is the same, to understand what the consumer is doing in the store and what best incents the purchase behavior that they want to incent with their customers.
That's so cool. So I spent about 20 years in St. Louis and
I was wondering. Okay.
My husband's family still lives there. So we were there a couple years ago for the holidays and I went into a Schnucks to get snacks and stuff. And here's this robot. And I was shocked because at least when I was there, it was probably 2021. It was as tall as I am.
Yeah.
And it was just moving through and it was like, no big deal. There's this person-sized robot and, I'm taking pictures of it. And my kids are like, what are you doing, Mom? I mean, it was different. I'm in Atlanta now. I've not seen that in the retail stores here. So they already were cutting edge, which is really cool. And you take all those learnings and can adapt. It's awesome.
Yeah. And there's an important point to what you brought up that ties into what we talked about before. I mean, there's two approaches to getting data or information about your inventory and your pricing on shelf. You could use a robot with a camera attached to it, or you can put those cameras fixed position in your ceiling or across the aisles, right? Both of those require different infrastructural investments and different maintenance day in and day out. And so Schnucks is taking the approach of let's do the low touch version of that. And let's do it in such a way that doesn't impact the consumer experience. Like other than you having to adapt to a robot in the aisle, that's the only thing that's being asked of you. The electronic shelf labels, those don't really ask you to do anything different as a consumer either. The algorithms running in the background don't ask you to do anything different as a consumer, but the cart does. And so that's the next step in their experimentation process in their design of the smart store to understand how valuable that is to them, going back to the point we talked about before.
Now I'm wanting to get plane tickets to go back and visit and go see, because I've not interacted with a smart cart. And I think it's fascinating how all of this is coming together.
It really is. Yeah. They and Amazon are really the leaders in that space. Amazon has theirs in their Amazon Fresh stores as well.
That's really cool. So we are moving into an age of 2D barcodes. And
yes.
If I say 2D barcode to most people, they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But you say QR code and they're like, oh yeah, duh, that's everywhere. Do you think 2D barcodes and the extra data that can be encoded them is going to impact the retail space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will over time. And I think it should. The question just comes back to, for me, with any technology is how easy is it to implement? And can you implement it in such a way where you can get the value out of it? So the value of the 2D barcode, from my understanding, and you guys, you know a hell of a lot about this more than I do. And so for me, a little knowledge can be dangerous. So take that with a grain of salt. But for me, the way I look at it simply is you can get more data attached to these barcodes, like multifold difference in what you could do before. And when you talk about the smart store design, the more data you can have and the more attribution you can give to certain things, the better off you're going to be in terms of understanding your customer in the long run. So that's the value here. And so the question is then, in my opinion, the retailers that get behind this to the right degree are going to have a leg up because they're going to understand what attribution they want to put on those codes, how are they going to do that process-wise, and then how they're going to put that back into their systems as they're designing their stores and their customer experiences, both in store and online, with that data to drive the best experience day in and day out. So yeah, 100%. It makes sense and goes right in line with what we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. The 2D barcode can encode a lot of different information. Things like the G10, the UPC, which is already there, right? So there's an initiative called Sunrise 2027, where at point of sale, instead of being able to scan just the linear barcode, you'll be able to scan that 2D barcode. But then you can get batch lot expiration date. Those are useful pieces of information. But then from a brand perspective, you can have information on the brand or coupons or all of these different things in that one barcode. Obviously, start small, because how are customers going to interact and how can point of sale systems utilize the information? But I think there's a lot that can be unlocked using that just QR code that people are familiar with already.
Yeah, and the food safety element's really important to me too. I mean, you look at some of the new food safety regulations coming down the pipeline as well. It just helps retailers get in front of that again for the grocery experience like we've been talking about.
Yep, absolutely. FSMA is a huge conversation with the folks that we work with, and we are talking about that as well.
Yes, it's not talked about enough broadly, I would say as well. It's not talked about in the circles that I walk in a lot of times. And so, yeah, it's good to talk about it here for sure.
That's enlightening and actually a little scary. So we've been doing a lot of work with FSMA 204 and how retailers and brand owners and restaurants need to get ahead of that regulation. It goes into effect in January 2026. And so we've been trying to get in front of that. We have, from a GS1 standards perspective, some guidance that can help the entire supply chain get in front of that using the standards. If you're going across point of sale, you're already using the standard. And I think there's a lack of understanding around that. But because FSMA incorporates so many different people within organizations, it's not just food safety. It's not just master data. It's not just technology. I think people are hearing it and not bringing it back to organizations. And what do I need to do with this? And it's huge. It really is a big undertaking, especially when you talk about the runway that the whole industry has to be compliant.
Yeah, 100%. And it just hit my radar screen probably about a month and a half ago. So that's why, to your point, I think it's good to talk about it now and to get as much awareness as possible around it.
Absolutely. You know, you talked about when you were at Target looking 5 to 10 years out. What do you think's 10 years out? What's the future of retail look like?
Oh, man, that's a great question, too. I mean, to me, there are 5 broad-based themes that I think are going to impact retail. And like I said before, the verticals are different, but it's always hard to encapsulate everything into 5 themes. But for me, those 5 themes are, I think, one, first and foremost, it's the buzzword du jour of the day, but I think it's really real, and that is generative AI. Specifically generative AI, not traditional AI or intelligent automation if you flip the initials around, but true generative AI, where you're creating something new with that capability. So that's something I think every boardroom needs to be talking about with their retail executives. The second one is really this concept of video commerce. And by that, I mean, we as consumers are so piped into our phones, and all of that content we're consuming is video. And so the question then becomes, what's the commerce platform of the future? How video-based is it? How do you as a retailer keep control of your video content in such a way that the commerce still comes through you? And how retailers navigate that question it's not an easy question to answer, but it's very important to think about. And so having your retail operation or organization set up to thrive in this new area of video and video commerce is going to be key. The third one, which we've talked about a little bit already, is the rise of the retail media network. So retail media networks are kind of the flavor of the month, the flavor of 2023, really, for the most part. Everyone's doing them. But the big question for me is, how do those actually come in store with the principles that we talked about? Right now, most retail media networks in store are just billboards in store. They're just big mass advertising. The tie into the advertising to the consumer and the behavior is the $64,000 question, or the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is another way to put it. And so how that continues to unfold is going to be interesting to me. So hence, why the dash card is such an interesting concept, or something else to that vein. Fourth to me is the sustainability push, and particularly what does that mean in the resale market as you look at specific verticals around that. That's going to still be something. And then lastly, the one that's really got my attention as of late is fleet electrification. How do retailers get behind electrifying their fleets day in and day out? And what's all the infrastructural requirements across cities, across states to make that happen? I think that's going to become a question that's more top of mind for everyone in the long run here, as we deal with all the issues that come, with that topic.
That's not even something I think that's hit. Well, I know it hasn't come across our radar of that, but you see it. I used to work at a large beer company, and even years ago, we had trucks that were electric and a lot of advertising around that too. And it almost hits around with the sustainability and circularity point that you talked about too. How are you just more environmentally aware about everything that's going on?
And there's going to be more and more regulations put towards that too, to your point. And so that's going to be forced upon the industry as well. And so how people are starting to get in front of that, like IKEA is a great example. They're doing tremendous things in that space. Other people will probably start to follow suit, but it's going to take a ton of coordination and infrastructural investment across everyone.
Nobody wants to have to do something for a regulation. So what can you do to get ready for whatever it may be and then get ROI or some kind of benefit from it and go beyond just checking the box? I made a regulation, and that's tough. This has been awesome. As we wrap up, Reed and I ask our guests 2 questions.
Okay.
So the first one is, what is your favorite technologies that's out there? It can be like in your personal life, or it can be in your professional or work life.
Generative AI is just blowing my mind. The way I think about it, it's like a performance enhancing drug. It's like steroids. It's real. I mean, it's not the metaverse of 2020, whenever the heck they rolled that out, 2021 or 2022. I don't even remember anymore. But this thing's real because if you use it and you really understand how it works, it can make you so much better at your job. And it can make you so much more creative. It's almost like that movie Limitless, if you ever saw that, where he takes that drug and his mind just expands. It's that exact same thing. And so if you haven't tried it yet or looked for a way to employ it in your job, I highly encourage you to do it because it is that powerful. I mean, you use it, you feel like Barry Bonds hitting 73 home runs in a season. Take what you will from him doing that, but it works that way.
And it's not replacing our brains. It just feels like it enhances it. If you can't find a sentence or a word or you're struggling to be creative, it just gives you that extra something. And then I decided I would test it out. Like my husband had a birthday and I write a poem for a however many year old man. And I gave no other information. I mean, it was so funny. I'm like, this is really cool. It's crazy. It's a little scary, but it is crazy what it can help with.
I never even thought about those use cases. Like, how can I send nice compliments to my wife every day? That's a great use case. Yeah.
Exactly. Somebody on the news was saying that they used ChatGPT to create like a vacation plan for them. They were going from X location to Y location, and they wanted to incorporate different kinds of stops on this driving trip. And it created this 7-day adventure for them. I'm like, I never thought about doing that. It's really cool.
It is limitless. I used that term before, but it really is. It's the most powerful drug I think that we as business people probably have at our fingertips. So that's my answer to that question, Liz.
You may have just answered the next question with the first one, but what blows your mind? There's a lot of trends. It sounds like generative AI is one of them, but is there anything else that kind of blows your mind, either work or in your personal life?
The other technology that we followed really closely for the last few years, I mean, AI has kind of stolen its thunder to a degree, and it's partially driven by AI, but it's not the generative AI necessarily, so to speak, more traditional AI, but is computer vision AI. Computer vision is really going to, in a lot of ways, be the fundamental backbone for how a lot of retail gets done. So we've talked about the cameras in the ceiling or the cameras in the cart monitoring what consumers are doing. That's one aspect of it, right? But at the same time, it's incredibly powerful when you start looking at it from an e-commerce standpoint in terms of being able to catalog and understand visually what items are in your product catalog. And therefore, you can script them the right way, write the product description. By that, I mean, write the product descriptions in the right manner, make sure the details are correct in a way that humans just can't do. I mean, e-commerce websites have so many products on them. For a human to review all that and update that, it's not tenable. It's not possible. And so that technology particularly is interesting to us because I think it's going to be the backbone of retail as we go forward. And many retailers are on the front end of that, but many still aren't, which is interesting to me.
It feels scary to start talking about computer vision, but it really is going to be the way that success happens in the world.
Yeah. It's funny too, because like when you put it in a retail context, it's what powers autonomous vehicles at the end of the day. That's a life or death empowerment when you get down to it, right? That thing has to work. So figuring out how it applies and can be the backbone to retail seems like a pretty basic problem to answer at the end of the day. If you can figure out how to drive a car autonomously, you probably can figure out how to use it to power a retail operation too.
Chris, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. As we see all of these different changes happen, we would love to have you back on and chat about what you're seeing more in the future. Thank you.
Anytime, would love to. Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute blast.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Next Level Supply Chain with GS1 US. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe to our feed and explore more great episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to share and follow us on social media. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.